Sometimes, especially during the long nights of autistic processes like writing ideologies for one of my another RimWorld playthroughs, or carefully composing my 6942nd mod list for an Elder Scrolls game, I like to reflect on how the culture of gaming has changed over the last decades. I've looked at my own gaming patterns and I've spotted a peculiar thing. During the last several years, my gaming habits were cyclical. There was a selection of games, mostly RPGs, sandboxes and strategies, to which I return over and over and over, in a cyclical pattern. Newer titles barely make any significant presence in my yearly gaming lists. When a new game makes an enter into my cycle of gaming, this is usually an old indie sandbox that was already 8 years in development and for some reason evaded my attention. When I do try a new AAA project, I either end up dropping it or finish it once, with a meager 40 to 50 hours of gameplay on Steam. Almost regretting my purchase, I then return to the tried and true games, which I replay almost every year in a specific pattern. I think that my case is not simply a peculiar trait of my own experience, but a part of a larger transformation of the gaming market and culture. I frequently observed similar cyclical gaming habits among other people and seen multiple threads on Reddit when people said that they play the same games over and over. I've also looked at the statistics Steam started to publish in 2022, and it has an interesting section that shows the percentage of playtime in new games, meaning released this year, or newer games, meaning released from 2 to 7 years ago, and of classic games, meaning released 8 years ago and more. In 2022, Steam users spent only 17% of playtime in games released during this year. In 2023, it was just 9%, and in 2024, 50%. Meanwhile, the games that were released 8 years ago and more were stable in 2023 and 2024, holding a share of 37 to 38%, and all of the remaining playtime was claimed by the games that were released from 2 to 7 years ago. As you can see from the data, the importance of new releases for gamers is critically low. Almost 40% of the entire gaming culture today exists around titles that were released more than 8 years ago, and some of the games that Steam called newer, that were released up to 7 years ago, can be considered old as well. I have no statistical data of the same nature which would objectively explain what gaming culture was before 2020s, but I have memories of what it was in 2010s and 2000s, when I was active as a gamer as well. I think that most of the things I will say about 2000s will also apply to second half of 1990s, especially in the United States and Western Europe, where the post-industrial society started to develop earlier than in the rest of the world. Let's begin with a discussion of economic, social and technological reality of gamers and the gaming identity in 2000s. In 2000s, each new AAA title was something that the majority of gamers wanted. It did not truly matter which games you preferred back in the day. Everyone was discussing the first Assassin's Creed or a new Call of Duty game. Even if you had zero interest in cars and driving, there was always a kind of community of gamers around you, of people who bought and played everything, who would also goad you into buying the new Need for Speed game, even if you had no interest in the series whatsoever. It was also a relatively common practice to upgrade your PC to play this one game everybody discusses and you can access. In 2000s, the internet was not yet as effective in providing you information about video games. The marketplaces for video games like Steam were not mainstream. The social media did not experience a massive growth yet, and you had to rely on specialized forums which had limited user base and, consequently, were not guaranteed to provide you with the information you needed. The deficit of information meant that you needed to communicate with other gamers in your closest vicinity, in your school, club, or college, even if your tastes were not really compatible. I know examples of people who played some nuanced strategy games in 2000s only to become a casual gamer in 2010s. The majority of video games were sold on CDs in shops that had a limited selection of discs. In this situation, it was hard to learn about the game that is closest to your ideal. You picked what was vaguely closest to what you wanted. And sometimes, a skilled salesman could also persuade you to buy something you usually did not want to try. A person who is completely absent from modern video game purchase formula is this figure of skilled salesman. This economic, technological and social reality of video gaming in 2000s created a situation of deficit, of games, of information, and of possibility of communication with gamers with tastes precisely like yours. This deficit pushed different kinds of gamers towards each other and created the gamers as the identity, a massive group of people, all of whom have a lot in common. Things started to change in late 2000s to early 2010s. During that period, Facebook claimed its place as the most popular social media platform in the world. Steam became a marketplace of participation for the majority of big game publishers. 2010 to 2011 was also the time when major YouTubers, including gaming YouTubers, started to emerge as a phenomenon. PewDiePie, for example, registered his channel in 2010. This was also a time when YouTube started to turn into a mainstream social media platform. The deficit of information on video games, one of the pillars of gaming culture of the 2000s, took a first major hit. Slowly but steadily, it became possible to find all the information you need. It became easier to learn about more and more obscure video games that fully corresponded with your interests. Slowly but surely, the need to rely on the community of gamers with different interests around you and the role of local video game shops started to decrease. But, of course, the decline of local communities of gamers was not the only reason of separation of the gaming community and emergence of the culture of cycle of gaming. For me personally, the year of 2011 was a turning point. Why? 2011 was a year of release of Minecraft Beta 1.8, the first version of Minecraft for me personally, and simultaneously the year of release of Minecraft. 2011 and 2012 were also the time of explosive growth of Minecraft's popularity. Also, in November of 2011, Skyrim was released. Both Minecraft and Skyrim are among the key cornerstones of cycle of gaming culture. I'm sure that for many people who practice relying on the same games year after year for entertainment, these two are likely important. I believe there are three reasons why Minecraft and Skyrim are both so important. First, both games are pretty unique in the sense that there aren't many games that scratch the particular itches that Minecraft and Skyrim do. Of course, there were a lot of clones of Minecraft, but they will always be secondary to the experience of Minecraft. There are few games that you can use to replace Skyrim, despite the obvious downsides of this game. And almost all of these games to replace Skyrim are other Elder Scrolls titles. Second, both of these games are almost infinitely replayable. Even if we took away the factors of roleplay, your fantasies, which can result in complicated but unnecessary projects which you might implement in-game for days and months, Minecraft still has a lot of dungeons to mine and plunder, picturesque biomes to observe. Even if you are not really interested in architecture, you will still end up constructing some basic utility buildings, for which you will need to craft the necessary blocks, which is a long process as well. You might also play multiplayer and find additional sources of entertainment there. If you are creative and want to create some mad things, like the insane highway through the Nether or the biggest automated wheat farm ever, Minecraft is the game with endless hours of content for you. Skyrim, even with its flawed faction questlines, streamlined role-playing systems, and simplified magic, can still provide hundreds of hours of gameplay for you, and you will still want to return to this world, simply because there are very few games that allow you to immerse yourself so deeply into your story. The third and the most important reason of why these two games were critical for growth of cycle of gaming culture was their instrumental nature. These games are, first and foremost, instruments which you use to fulfill some kind of fantasy. To make this fantasy a reality, albeit a virtual one, you go to games like Skyrim or Minecraft. For example, You want to roleplay as a master of poisons who lives in seclusion of a swamp, practices his arts there, occasionally selling his products and sometimes using his deadly mixtures. This master of poisons might have some dark connections with rogue mages or criminals, or he might actually be a reclusive artist who brews his poisons just for the sake of art. I have already described some potential ideas in Minecraft for you, but here's another one. You want to make a Portuguese-themed vineyard on a Minecraft server with your friends. You want to build a beautiful villa with grape fields sprawling around it. You want to make wine, sell it to the villagers, and have some events with your friends inside your villa or inside the buildings constructed by your friends, to which you would bring your wine, and you will sit on Discord with them, showing each other your creations and talking. But wait, what are you saying? There is no wine in Minecraft, and how are you going to sell a non-existent product to the villagers? And this is where we approach the most important topic, the cherry on the top of the cake, the mods. Mods make games that were already potentially hundreds of hours long, thousands of hours long. Moreover, mods significantly enlarge the potential of any game as an instrument. It is possible to make a poison expert I described earlier in Skyrim without any mods at all, but it is, for example, impossible to roleplay a necromancer who lives in the dungeon, creating his thralls, and who has to defend his isolated home from the attacks of adventurers, witch hunters, priests, and local law enforcement. With mods, however, it becomes possible not only to create this whole situation, but also tailor the entire game experience in such a manner that the new necromancer's abilities added by your mods are balanced and not overpowered. Mods contribute immensely to the cycle of gaming. In some cases, mine included, modding becomes a game in itself. Making a high-quality, stable mod pack for an Elder Scrolls game tailored for your personal preferences and the needs of a specific roleplay idea that you want to implement is a long process that takes, from my experience, up to 2 weeks. Modding communities and websites grew immensely in 2010s. I remember the experience of modding Oblivion in late 2000s, and back then there were no established massive sites with mods like Nexus mods, for example. In order to find modifications, you needed to screen several obscure websites that do not exist anymore. Consequently, modding games in 2000s faced the same problems of deficit of information as everyone else in the world of gamers. The expansion of modding created a growth of demand for guides which would explain some particularly difficult parts of the process, and nowadays there are many detailed texts that explain how not to break Skyrim while you mod it. Like this one, or this one, which additionally increased the availability of modding. The last but not the least important factor that contributed to the cycle of gaming culture is the state of the video gaming industry itself. First of all, the importance of infinitely replayable session games grew significantly. You can play Overwatch, Counter-Strike, or Dota for years, and this will grow into a habit which will never leave your life. Second, AAA games face the problem of the constant growing prices of development of games. Not only they face inflation, like everyone else, they are also at a disadvantage of sorts in relation to indie developers or niche video game creators like Paradox, although Paradox are now closer to the mainstream than they ever were. AAA video game developers are additionally limited by the expectation that they will create a novel visual experience, which pushes the price of development and forces the AAA developers to focus on the graphics instead of interesting gameplay ideas, world building, or storytelling. High-cost video game development is also dependent on big publishers who are dependent on boomer investors who need fast profits in order to fund their 14th house and 6th yacht. They need video gaming industry to be profitable at great speed, which discourages the AAA games development from pursuing interesting ideas and makes them work on a strict deadline. Furthermore, the growing price of development of AAA games leads to most AAA projects having low gameplay hour to dollar value. If I'm not mistaken, recent single-player AAA releases, such as Assassin's Creed Shadows or Clair Obscur Expedition 33, have around 60 to 70 hours of gameplay, with a price tag of around $60. RimWorld, an indie game, costs around $120 with all DLCs, while providing hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of hours of gameplay for the people. Even the base game that costs 4 times less can still provide these hundreds of hours of fun for you. The same can be said about Minecraft or Kenshi or Factorio. Indie games that were around for years may be equally fun, and for some, like me, even more entertaining than all new AAA releases. Furthermore, they are more economical for you. Even non-indie but still niche developers like Paradox, who seem greedy with their DLC policy, still give you more value per dollar in comparison to AAA developers. Yes, you might pay $5 for 3 sets of clothing for Arctic characters for your Crusader Kings free campaign, sets of clothing that you might have gotten for free through modding. Yes, you might pay a sum of $350 to get all DLCs for Stellaris, but if you like these two games, you will play them for more than 700 hours and you will get more dollar per hour value than in most AAA projects. All these reasons, which I've tried to intricately analyze, created a new socio-cultural situation when there is no community of gamers as a whole and no mainstream releases that everyone is following. In 2025, we live in a universe of multiple worlds of gamers. Role players are separated from competitive shooter players. Sports sim fans rarely communicate with real-time strategy grinders. Different families of gamers exist in separate informational bubbles. Now that we've discussed the phenomenon of cycle of gaming at length, let us end with sharing some personal stories. I've tried to understand how my own cycle of gaming functions. It is connected to 3 things I generally want from video games. First, I want to have an instrument where I might create interesting socio-political units and simulate their life, their struggles, their growth, their entire history. For this, I use strategy games that have a strong role-playing element, or party RPGs with large emphasis on freedom of your actions. Games like Stellaris, Crusader Kings, RimWorld, and Kenshi play the core role here, but there are other games for this as well. Second, and this is actually connected to my first wish, I want to create in-depth narratives about specific characters that I create and roleplay. Their lives must be portrayed in their entireties and all detail. We need to be able to walk through the house where the character lives, to eat the food that this character prefers, to live through personal choices that character faces. In the game, I need to have all the instruments needed to recreate all of this. Here, Elder Scrolls titles from Morrowind to Skyrim mostly dominate, with some influence of Minecraft and Stardew Valley, as these 2 games are really great at constructing small, detailed worlds. Third, sometimes I wish to engage in mental competition, to use my thinking process to achieve victory. This is where I play Civilization, Total Wars, and some niche competitive real-time strategies. My desires change one another in cyclical pattern, and during my free time, I use this selection of games to satisfy them, one after another, with different mods and different ideas in my mind. This is what cycle of gaming is for me. And what do you think? Do you feel that you are in a cycle of gaming? Which games are part of your cycle? Or do you feel that you do not have a cycle of gaming? Do you still feel that you are part of a larger community of gamers that play the same games as they release? Does my analysis reflect the reality of your life? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments section. And if you enjoyed the experience of watching this video and discussing it, subscribe for more insights from Videological Dungeon. Goodbye.